The Golden-Haired Queen. 1. Once upon a time there was a beautiful queen. She was the most beautiful woman in the world. So her people called her the Golden-Haired Queen. Her long curly hair went down to her heels. She used to put a crown of flowers on her head. Her dresses were embroidered with diamonds and pearls. Her people admired her very much. In a neighboring kingdom, there was a single youth king. He was rich and handsome. When he heard about the golden-haired queen, and although he had never seen her, he loved her so much that he could neither eat nor drink. He decided to send an envoy to ask for her hand in marriage. A wonderful carriage was made ready for the envoy. The king gave him 100 horses and 100 servants. He ordered him not to come back without the queen. From the moment that the envoy left, people in the kingdom talked about the queen that will come with the envoy. The king had no doubt that the golden-haired queen is coming, so he ordered to get the most wonderful dresses and furniture ready. While the workers were working hard, the envoy arrived at the queen's palace. He delivered the message of the king. The queen didn't like this marriage request. She asked the envoy to send her thanks to the king and tell His Majesty that the queen didn't think of marriage at the time. The envoy left the court of the golden-haired queen sadly because he could not accompany her to marry the king. The envoy took back all the gifts that the king had sent with him. The wise queen knew that girls do not accept gifts from bachelors. She refused all beautiful diamonds and many other valuable gifts. In order to please the king, she accepted some English pins. When the envoy reached the capital city of the king, where he was so impatiently awaited, everybody was astonished that he did not accompany the queen. The king cried like a young child. Everyone tried to console him, to no avail. In the royal court, there was a young handsome youth. He had a unique personality of high morals. He was called Avenant. Everyone loved him, except for those who envied the king's confidence in him. While some people were talking about the failed mission of the king's envoy, Avenant said carelessly, "If the king sent me, I am sure she would have come with me." One of these mischief makers went immediately to the king and said, "My lord, you know not what Avenant stressed. He said that if you had sent him to the golden-haired, beautiful queen, he would have accompanied her. Notice his malice. He pretends that he is more handsome than you, and that she would have been so fond of him that she would have followed him." The king was astonished and cried, "This cute servant made fun of my plight. He thought that he's better than me. Send him to the top of the great tower and let him starve to death." The royal guards hastened in search of Avenant. They dragged him to prison after beating him up. The poor youth had only a little carpet to lie upon and a small spring under the tower, of which he drank a few drops to refresh himself. One day when Avenant was exhausted, he wondered, with a heavy sigh, "What does the king complain of? He had no one more loyal than me. I did him no harm." By chance, the king passed by the tower and heard the voice of a person he had liked. He stopped to listen, despite the opposition of his companions who hated Avenant, who said to the king, "My lord, why are you so interested? You know he is a rogue." The king replied, "Leave me alone. I would like to hear his complaint." After listening, the king's eyes filled with tears. He opened the door of the tower and called out to the prisoner. Avenant came and knelt before him in deep sadness and kissed his feet. "My lord, what have I done? that I am thus severely treated." "You made fun of me and my envoy," answered the king. "You claimed that if I had sent you, you would have accompanied the queen." Avenant said, "This is true. I would tell her of your fine qualities, and I am sure she would not refuse. I never offended your majesty." The king saw clearly that Avenant was innocent. He cast an angry look upon the scandalmongers and accompanied Avenant, repenting the wrong he had done to him. After serving him a royal supper, he called him into his court and said to him, "Avenant, I still love the queen. Her refusal has not discouraged me, but I know not what path to take to urge her to marry me. I'll try to send you to her to see if you could succeed." Avenant replied that he was ready to obey the king, and that he was ready to set out the next day. The king said, "I would get a great procession to accompany you." "This is unnecessary," answered Avenant. "I need only a good horse and a ladder from your majesty." The king embraced him. He was delighted to find him prepared to start quickly. 2. It was on a Monday morning when Avenant took the king's permission to start his mission, quite alone and without pomp or noise. His mind was occupied with plans to urge the queen to marry the king. Whenever a good idea came to him regarding his speech to the queen, he got off his horse and sat under the trees to write it at once, so as not to forget it. One morning Avenant had a great idea. He got off his horse and sat in a meadow beside a narrow river with tall trees on its banks. After he had written his note, he saw a golden fish on the grass. The fish was tired after trying to catch some little flies. It had leaped so far out of the water that it had fallen on the grass and was nearly dead. Avenant took pity upon it, and although it was a good dinner for him, he picked it up and put it gently back into the river. As soon as the fish felt refreshed, she began to recover and went down to the bottom, then rising again joyously to the bank of the river. She said, "I thank you for your kindness. Without you, I should have died. You have saved me. I will do my best to repay you." After this little compliment, she darted down again into the water, leaving Avenant surprised at her intelligence and kindness. Another day, while Avenant continued his journey, he saw a crow in great distress. The poor bird was pursued by a large eagle, which had nearly caught it, and would have swallowed it like a lentil if Avenant had not felt compassion for it. He took his bow and arrow, took a good aim at the eagle, and dropped it dead. The crow was enraptured and perched on a tree. "Avenant," it cried to him, "you were very generous to save me while I am only a poor crow, but I will not be ungrateful. I will do as much for you." Avenant admired the good feelings of the crow and continued his journey. Avenant entered a great wood so early in the morning that there was scarcely enough light to see his road. He heard an owl screeching, like an owl in despair. He said, "Here's an owl in great trouble. It has been caught, perhaps, in a net." He searched everywhere and at last discovered some large nets, which had been spread by hunters during the night to catch small birds. "What a pity," said he. "These people are clever in tormenting each other or catching poor animals which do them no harm or mischief." He took out his knife and cut the ropes. The owl took flight, but returned swiftly. It said, "Avenant, it is needless for me to make a long speech to talk about your favor. The hunters would soon be here. I have a grateful heart, I will do as much for you. These were the three most important adventures Avenant faced on his journey. 3. Avenant was so eager to fulfill his aim that he lost no time to arrive at the palace of the golden-haired queen. Everything in the palace was admirable. There were diamonds to be seen in heaps, as though they were pebbles. Fine clothes, sweetmeats, and money composed the most wonderful sight that Avenant saw. He thought that if he could persuade the queen to leave all this to go to the king, his master, he should be very lucky. He washed, combed his hair, and dressed in a wonderful suit. He also bought a beautiful little dog, a basket, and a scarf. Avenant was so handsome and decent. When he presented himself at the palace gate, the guards saluted him most respectfully, and they ran to inform the queen that Avenant, envoy of the neighboring king, requested to see her. When the queen heard the name Avenant, she guessed that he must be so handsome. She said, "Avenant is a good name. I guess this man is so handsome." The queen's maids cried, "Yes, he is so handsome and decent." Some of them added, "We saw him from upstairs, and as long as he remained under the windows, we could do nothing." The queen answered, "So handsome! Do you amuse yourselves by looking at young men? Give me my blue embroidered dress and comb my hair very carefully. Get me some fresh flowers, my high-heeled shoes, and my fan. Clean my royal hall and throne. I would like him to say that I'm the most beautiful." Avenant was ushered into the royal hall. He was so struck with admiration that he could scarcely speak. When he restored his composure, he gave a touching speech. Then he begged the queen not to return alone. The queen replied, "Gentle Avenant, your speech is touching, and I assure you I should be very happy to fulfill your aim. But you must know that about a month ago I was walking by the riverside with all my maids. When I pulled off my glove, I lost my ring, which unfortunately fell into the river. I liked it more than my kingdom. Can you imagine my sadness for losing it? I made a vow never to listen to any offers of marriage except from that man who can get my ring back. Let me see what you have to do in this matter." Avenant was surprised at this answer. He bowed in front of the queen and begged her to accept the little dog, the basket, and the scarf. But she replied that she would receive no presents and asked him to think on what she had said. When Avenant returned to his lodging, he went to bed without having any supper, and his little dog, whose name was Cabriole, would do the same and lay down beside his master. All night long, Avenant never ceased sighing. Avenant said, "Where can I find a ring that fell a month ago into a long river? It is nonsense. It would be too foolish to attempt looking for it." The queen only stated this condition because she knew it was impossible for me to succeed. Then he sighed again and was very sad. Cabriole said, "My dear master, I advise you not to despair. You deserve to be happy. Let us go to the riverside as soon as it is daylight." Avenant gave him 2 pats without saying a word. He fell asleep quickly due to sadness and exhaustion. As soon as Cabriole saw daybreak, he walked around so that he awaked Avenant and said to him, "Dress yourself, master, and let us go out." Avenant was quite willing. He got up, dressed, and descended to the garden, and from the garden went directly to the river, on the banks of which he strolled, with his hat pulled over his eyes and his arms folded, thinking only of departure, when suddenly he heard someone calling at him, "Avenant! Avenant!" He looked all around and could see nobody. he thought he was dreaming. He moved on when again the voice called, "Avenant, Avenant." "Who is it?" he asked. Gabriel, who was very little and was looking close down into the water, replied, "You will never believe me. It is a golden fish that I see here." Immediately the fish appeared on the surface and said to Avenant, "You saved my life, and I promise to do as much for you. Dear Avenant, here is the ring of the golden-haired queen." Avenant stooped and took the ring out of the fish's mouth, whom he thanked 1,000 times. Instead of returning to his lodging, he went directly to the palace, followed by little Cabriole, who was very glad that he had urged his master to walk by the river bank. The queen was informed that Avenant requested to see her. She said, "Alas, poor youth, he is coming to take leave of me. He is convinced that this mission is now impossible and he wants to tell his master." Avenant was introduced and gave her the ring, saying, "Madam, I obeyed your commands. Will it please you to accept the king, my master, as a husband?" When she saw her ring, she was so astonished that she thought she was dreaming. "Really," said she, "Avenant, you must be served by a fairy, for by natural means this is impossible." Avenant answered, "I am not acquainted with any fairy, but I was very anxious to obey you." She said, "You have a strong will, and you must do me another service, without which I'll never be married. There is a prince not far from here, named Galifron, who believed that he will make me his wife. He declared to me his determination, accompanying it by the most terrible threats, that if I refused him, he would destroy my kingdom. So, first of all, you must fight him and bring me his head." Avenant was a little astounded at this proposition. He mused for a few minutes upon it and then answered, "Well, madam, I will fight Galifron. I believe I shall be conquered, but I will die as a brave man." The princess was very surprised at his determination. She stated 1,000 reasons to prevent his undertaking the adventure. This was of no use. He went out to get his weapons ready and collect everything else he might need. When he was ready, he put little Cabriole in his basket, rode a fine horse, and went to the lands of Galifron. He asked about him all those he met, and everyone told him that Galifron was a demon whom nobody dared approach. The more he heard of him, the more his alarm increased. Cabriole encouraged him and said, "My dear master, while you fight him, I will bite his legs. He will stoop to rid himself of me, and then you can kill him easily." Avenant admired the wit of the little dog, but he knew well enough that his help could be of little avail. Finally, he arrived at the castle of Galifron. All the roads to it were full with the bones and bodies of men whom Galifron had torn to pieces. He did not wait long before he saw the monster coming through a wood. When he saw Galifron, he was in a dreadful rage, and snatching up an iron mace, he would have crushed Avenant at one blow, had not a crow descended at that moment on his head, and with its beak most adroitly picked out both his eyes. The blood ran down his face, and he was hitting with the mace in every direction. Avenant avoided his blows, and gave him such thrusts with his sword, running it up to the hilt in his body, that at last he fell bleeding from 1,000 wounds. Avenant quickly cut off his head, quite transported with joy at his good fortune. And the crow, who had perched itself on the nearest tree, said to him, I have not forgotten the favor you rendered me in killing the eagle which pursued me, and I promise to do as much for you. I think I have done so today." "I owe all to you, Crow," replied Avenant, "and remain your obliged servant." Avenant rode his horse, carrying the horrible head of Galifron. When he reached the Queen's city, all the people followed him, crying, "Behold the brave Avenant who killed the monster." So the Queen, who heard a great uproar, and who trembled lest they should come and announce to her the death of Avenant, dared not inquire what had happened. But after a minute she saw Avenant entering, carrying the giant's head, and he said, "Madam," said Avenant to the Queen, "your enemy is dead. I trust you will no longer refuse the king, my master." "Ah, pardon me," said the Queen, "but indeed I must refuse him, unless you can find means before my departure to bring me some water from the dark grotto. There is a deep cavern. At the mouth of it are two dragons who prevent anyone from entering. Flames come out of their jaws and eyes. Inside the cavern is a deep pit into which you must descend. It is full of toads, adders, and serpents. At the bottom of this pit there is a small cavity through which flows the fountain of health and beauty. I must get some of that water. Whatever is washed with it becomes marvelous. If persons are handsome, they remain so forever. If ugly, they become beautiful. If young, they remain always young. If old, they become young again. You may imagine that. I would not quit my kingdom without some of this wonderful water." "Madam," Avenant replied, "you are so beautiful. This water will be quite useless to you. But I am an unfortunate envoy whom you'll kill. I'll go in search of that which you covet, and I'm sure that I shall never return." Avenant set out with the little dog Cabriole to search for the dark grotto and the water of beauty. Everybody who met felt pity for him and wondered why does the Queen always ask for the impossible. Avenant passed on without saying a word, but he was in very low spirits. Having nearly got to the top of a mountain, he sat down to rest a little, allowing his horse to graze and Cabriole to run after the flies. He knew that the dark grotto was not far from that spot, and looked about to see if he could see it. Avenant saw a huge rock, as black as ink, and it sends out heavy dark smoke. It was one of the dragons, casting out fire from its mouth and eyes. It had a green and yellow body, huge claws, and a long tail, coiled round in more than 100 folds. Cabriole saw this, and was so frightened he did not know where to hide. Avenant, who was ready to die, drew his sword and descended towards the cavern, with a bottle which the Queen had given to him to fill with the water of beauty. He said to his little dog Cabriole, "It is all over with me. I shall never be able to obtain the water which is guarded by those dragons. When I am dead, fill the bottle with my blood and carry it to the Queen, that she may see what happened to me. Then go to the king, my master, and tell him my sad story." As he uttered these words, he heard a voice calling, "Avenant, Avenant!" "Who calls me?" he asked, and he saw an owl in the hollow of an old tree, who said to him, "You let me out of the hunter's net and saved my life. I promised to do as much for you, and now is the time. Give me your bottle. I am familiar with all the windings in the dark grotto. I will bring you some of the water of beauty." Avenant quickly handed the bottle to the owl, and saw it entering the grotto without the least difficulty. In less than a quarter of an hour, the owl returned with the bottle full of water and tightly closed. He thanked the owl heartily and reascending the mountain and joyfully took his way back to the city. He went straight to the palace and gave the bottle to the golden-haired queen, who had no excuse. 4. She thanked Avenant, gave orders for everything to be ready for her departure, and finally set out with him on their journey. She found him an exceedingly agreeable companion, and said to him more than once, "If you had wished it, I would have made you king of my kingdom." But his answer was always, "I would not commit such treachery to my master in front of all the kings on this earth, although you are to me more beautiful than the sun." At last, they arrived at the king's capital city, and His Majesty, hearing that the queen was approaching, went to meet her and made her the most superb presents in the world. The marriage was celebrated with such great rejoicing that people talked of nothing else. But the queen, who deeply loved Avenant, was never happy when he was out of her sight, and was always praising him. The queen would say to the king, "But for Avenant, I should never have been here. For my sake he has done impossibilities. You should feel deeply indebted to him. He brought me the water of beauty. I shall never grow old, and I shall always remain beautiful." The envious courtiers, hearing the queen express herself thus, said to the king, "You're not jealous, although you have good cause to be so. The queen is so deeply in love with Avenant that she can neither eat nor drink. She can talk of nothing but him and your obligations towards him. Anyone else would not have done as much." "That's true," said the king. "Now I think of it. Let him be put in the tower, with cuffs on his hands and feet." Avenant was accordingly captured, and in return for his faithful service to the king, fettered hand and foot in a dungeon. He was allowed to see no one but the guard, who threw him a morsel of black bread through a hole, and gave him some water in a small cup. His little dog Cabriole, however, did not leave him, but came daily to console him and tell him all the news. When the queen heard of Avenant's misfortune, she flung herself at the king's feet in tears and implored him to release Avenant from prison. But her entreaties increased the anger of the king. He said to himself, "It is because she loves him." So he refused. The queen stopped asking him and fell into a deep sadness. The king thought that perhaps she did not think him handsome enough. He longed to wash his face with the water of beauty, hoping the queen would feel more love for him. The bottleful of this water was on a table in the queen's chamber. She had placed it there for the pleasure of looking at it frequently. But one of her chambermaids, trying to kill a spider with a broom, unfortunately threw down the bottle, which fell into pieces, and all the water was lost. She swept the fragments of glass away quickly. She didn't know what to do. A good idea suddenly occurred to her. She had seen in the king's cabinet a similar bottle, full of water, as clear as the water of beauty. So, without a word to anyone, she skillfully took it and placed it on the queen's table. The water that was in the king's cabinet was used for the execution of princes and great noblemen who were condemned to die for any crime. Instead of beheading or hanging them, their faces were washed with this water, which had the fatal property of throwing them into a deep sleep from which they never awakened. One evening, the king took down the bottle, which he thought contained the water of beauty, and flushed his face he fell into a deep slumber and died. The little dog, Cabriole, was the first to hear the news of the king's death, and ran with it to Avenant, who begged him to go to the queen and remind her of the poor prisoner. Cabriole slipped quietly through the crowds, for there was great confusion at the court due to the king's death, and said to the queen, "Madam, do not forget poor Avenant." She immediately recalled all that he had suffered on her account and his extreme fidelity. She left the palace silently and went directly to the tower, where with her own hands she took the irons off the hands and feet of Avenant, and putting a crown of gold upon his head and a royal mantle over his shoulders, she said, "Come, charming Avenant, I make you a king and you'll be my husband." He threw himself at her feet in joy and gratitude. Everybody was delighted to have him as their master. His wedding was the most splendid that ever seen in the world, and the golden-haired queen reigned happily with the handsome King Avenant for a long time.